Hey everyone, my name is Dana Markert and I'm a senior public health major. And for my senior internship, I had the opportunity to intern at Healthy Communities at Navicent Health. And my main project that we focused on was the Faith-Based Health Summit. So before we get into the presentation, I wanted to tell you guys about some goals that I had that we should be able to complete by the end of the presentation. The first being, audiences should be able to understand the importance and the need of a faith-based health summit for the population of Middle Georgia. Audiences should be able to understand the methods used to carry out the summit. Audience should be able to understand the components and the makeup of the summit. So first I wanted to dive into a little bit about Healthy Communities. Healthy Communities has 3 types of services. They have health and prevention, advanced illness management, and chronic care management. And advanced illness management and chronic care management are very similar in that they try to do a lot of care coordination and with their patients signing up them for services and connecting them with local establishments. And so that's what those agencies are for. But for my project, I specifically focused in health and prevention. And with health and prevention, they have 2 main goals. The first is to reduce burdens of healthcare workers or healthcare infrastructure. And what this means is they try to prevent as many people coming into the hospital as possible. And so this would look like trying to make communities as healthy as possible. And this kind of correlates with the second one of create healthier communities with partnerships. And what this means is kind of establishing a relationship between the community members to local establishments and kind of providing them with the services that they may need to live healthier and happier lives. And I wanted to talk a little bit about my experience on the community education side of Healthy Communities. My supervisor allowed me to go to many health fairs, community events, Walk with a Doc, which is a program where we pair up doctors and nurses with members of the community, and they are able to walk in a park and kind of discuss different current health topics. So for example, during the season, the flu was a very common topic, and more recently, the coronavirus, and so kind of just topics that may be harder for people to discuss and they want to hear from a real doctor. And lastly, patient education was a big part of it. And with patient education, if you look in the bottom left corner, there's a folder with information having to do with cardiovascular disease. And so what I had the opportunity to do was to go into the patient's room if they were recently diagnosed with cardiovascular disease or many other chronic diseases. And I was able to kind of relieve some of their healthcare burdens by planning like long-term goals and helping them understand their diagnosis a little bit better. But my main goal at Healthy Communities and my main project was the Faith-Based Health Summit. So I wanted to set up a little bit about my community education side of the Faith-Based Health Summit because this really helped me establish some relationships within the communities. I was able to kind of understand Middle Georgia a little bit better as I was doing community education. And so this was really helpful when it came to kind of laying the framework for the summit. I kind of had a better understanding as to the health needs of Middle Georgia. And so I was able to plan and make the summit just generally better. So when we first began to plan the summit, we had to kind of pick the purpose of the summit as well as the audience. And when we were doing a lot of research, we found that the health in Middle Georgia was particularly burdened with specific health disparities. Specifically, Macon is third in the state for adult diabetes with a 37.1% prevalence. And they are also burdened with heart disease, blood pressure, obesity, and Macon-Bibb County is especially burdened with mental health issues with a poverty rate of 26.7%. And so as you can see, the Macon-Bibb County area is especially burdened with a lot of different chronic diseases. And so we do have a lot of our patients that are signed up for different government programs such as Medicare and Medicaid. And so that's what a lot of our clientele has been. And so we asked ourselves who would benefit the most as to who could take the information that they receive at the summit and kind of relay it back to the community members. And what we found specifically with the population of faith-based organizations is they have very close networking within a community. And so we took the approach of inviting faith-based leaders. And first we had to do a lot of research as to how much influence does faith-based leaders have on a community. And what we saw was that faith-based leaders often have a lot of leverage on a community. So usually faith-based leaders are regarded as very high up in a community. They are very trusted and influential. Specifically with policymakers, they may be able to do a lot of lobbying and within a court system to kind of understand what's going on in the county, and if they want certain laws or rules passed, they may go to a faith-based leader because of their influence on the community. And when you try to make a large impact on a population, it's also very hard to kind of touch base with every single person in that community. And so when you do have limited funds and means, it's often nice to pick a select few in a community. And so in public health, we like to call these people gatekeepers because they are able to gain access into the community. They help us give us a key into the community. And so we refer to the faith-based leaders as gatekeepers, as they are able to kind of help us have influence into that community. And throughout history, we've seen a lot of religion kind of being tied up with a spiritual and a physical wellness. And so you may see this in religious texts or Bible verses. Your body is a temple, and it's important to not only have very good spiritual health, but physical health. And so with faith-based organizations, it may be easier to kind of persuade them to care about their physical health. And so this information might be processed better for these sort of populations. With a community-based participatory approach, this is more of an onboarding approach as to if one member in a community feels persuaded to act a certain way or maybe live a healthier lifestyle, then because of their influence and their trust within that community, they may be able to influence others. And so kind of getting one person to stir up something in a community may be beneficial to changing that community for the better. With partnerships with organizations, this could be very good for Navicent specifically, or whatever organization that you're working with that is trying to change that community, because if you are able to work with that community and give them staff and things of that nature, then you may be able to help them and also do a little bit of self-promotion. So with Navicent, they may want to make the community members aware of the certain products that they have or the certain services that they have, and so it would be a great two-way street self-promotion. And lastly, we just want to encourage a great amount of health ministry, because with a health minister in faith-based organizations, you'll often see a overall greater community impact when it comes to health. And so we try to strongly encourage health ministers with that, because with health ministers come a healthier community. So we wanted to tie the two together of what a faith-based leader's influence would look like specifically in Middle Georgia. So if you look at the demographics of Middle Georgia, you can see that they are heavily African American, and Macon claims to have the most churches per capita, which actually Macon is the 4th in the state. They have around 200 registered organizations that claim that they are faith organizations. So this may be a little bit of a different number depending on who would like to identify with faith. and you have a population with 60.6% are religious. And so it's a heavily religious community. And also you can see that it may be quite rural and with populations of the elderly that are not seeking health care. And so faith-based leaders can be a great influence if you may have some trouble reaching people that are more rural, or you have the elderly who may only go to the doctors every few months, but they go to church multiple times a week. And so the faith-based leaders can actually give a gauge as to the actual health in the community that may not be seen because of the lack of people seeking health care. So we wanted to kind of get the best language when it came to who we would invite to this summit. So we want to invite the faith-based leaders. So to define a faith-based leader, we said it was someone who is generally recognized as a leader of the faith-based organizations. So we wanted to also only invite the people that are most important and that would apply to the topics at the summit. And so we wanted to cap it at one person being the main leader as well as someone else from the leadership of that organization. So that could look like pastors, priests, ministers, youth pastors, rabbis, and so we wanted to cap it so that the most important people were coming to the summit rather than just open to the whole community. Now we get into the pre-planning phase of the summit, and first we had to develop our goals and objectives. So what did we want to accomplish with this summit? The first being making faith-based organizations aware of Navicent and setting up the ties so that they have the correct contacts and connections. So we thought it was very important to establish a relationship with the faith-based leaders, because that way we kind of open our doors for them so they can use our services, but also we kind of know what's going on in the community. So establishing that relationship was one of our top priorities. The second is to address the critical health concerns in the Macon-Bibb County area. So obviously, with the themes of this summit, which whatever they may be, we wanted to address those health concerns, and hopefully the faith-based leaders can bring that information back to their community and relay that information out. Third is to better understand the health needs in the faith-based organizations. So one of the things we wanted to accomplish with this summit is to make sure that it is kind of an openness for networking and also giving the faith-based leaders a voice as to what is going on in their community, because again, as I mentioned earlier, it may be a little bit more rural, and the faith-based leaders have a better gauge as to actually what's happening in the community. So we want to give them a voice, and that's one of the things we wanted to provide with this summit. And lastly is to establish a framework for the Faith-Based Health Summit to be a future event. So we want to put everything that is needed in place so this can be an event for the future. And possibly it could be a great event for networking, and it doesn't even just have to be a one-time yearly event. It can be a continuous contact and engagement within the community, so it could be bigger and better things. I wanted to put up some pictures as to some community events that I had the chance to go to, because as I was going to these community events, they all ended up being great helps as to what I would like to see at our Faith-Based Health Summit. So here at the top left, we have a picture of a poster, and this is something that we really admired because of its choice of color and kind of creativity. You have pictures of the speaker and kind of an agenda of all the events that is going on that afternoon. The bottom left, we have a pastor's breakfast that I had the opportunity to go to, and they made sure to mention that there's free food and kind of it's a shorter event, and they put the address, and it's very simple, and that's also something that we wanted to take into account. And you see the pictures of food here. We had a challenge of kind of finding something that is delicious for the pastors. Usually they like the fatty breakfast with a lot of meat, but we try to find a good medium that they may like. So when it came to actually outreaching to the faith-based leaders and letting them know about the summit, this was awfully challenging because you see a lot of the faith-based leaders not actually in the churches, at their desks, answering phone calls. They're usually out in the community acting. So we decided that it would be best to do a lot of our inviting at the community events, and that is why my supervisor gave me the opportunity to go to a lot of these events, and I felt like I was always networking for this summit. So one of the things that we found would be a great way to kind of reel the faith-based leaders in is the types of incentives, marketing, phone calls, meeting at community events, and then word of mouth. So at a lot of the health fairs that I was attending, I was often leaving with a bag full of goodies and different freebie events that I had received, as well as information. And so we also wanted to take that into account for many of our giveaways at the summit. And so these are some of the incentives and freebies and giveaways, and we wanted to use a lot of kind of free promotion as we put our brand on a lot of these products. So when they do attend the summit, they would get this little bag at the sign-in, and they would be able to receive some Band-Aids, hand sanitizer, pens, tissues. And so you want to do items that certainly relate to your cause. So for our cause of being a hospital and being health related, we wanted to include health items. And this is a great way to do really great free branding, and also we noticed that the faith-based leaders love these free ticketed items. So they could take this back to their congregation and you have a lot of free promotion. And we had a lot of vendors at the event that were also going to have these free giveaways, as well as during our break times, we were going to have big ticketed item giveaways. So like gym memberships and philanthropy money and stuff like that. And so you want to have items that are related to your cause. And of course, before we could really make any major decisions, we had to go through our committee. Our committee was made up of Navicent employees. They were from multiple different departments, such as pastoral care, youth departments, emergency departments, just so we could have a great variety onto gauging our summit and getting some great ideas out there. So we would meet once a month, and then closer to the event, we would meet every other week. And so it was very important for us to kind of decide, and as I had never done a summit something of this magnitude, they were able to help me with their events that they had planned in the past, or maybe if they knew about a pastor's breakfast or something like that, then we were constantly encouraging each other and helping each other on the way. So as a committee, we decided on our venue criteria. And one of the things I realized with Navicent is the amount of policy that goes into a lot of events like this. One of Navicent's policy is that the venue that you choose cannot be religious. We wanted to have a venue that is low priced because we were working with a very limited budget. We wanted a venue that was easy to navigate and kind of in close proximity to a lot of the churches, so possibly the middle of Macon. We wanted a venue that had catering, whether it be on-site or off-site. We wanted a venue that could accommodate 75 to 150 people, and this number we estimated based on our responses on the survey and how well the summit was received. We wanted a venue that had plenty of room for the stage, the projector, and other AV, because for a lot of our speakers, the projector and the presentation was a huge part of their presentation. So it was important to have those visuals there for them. And lastly, we wanted enough room for the sponsors and the vendors tables, so they were also able to give their free promotional events and educate the faith-based leaders that would come. And when it came to outreach and letting the faith-based leaders know about the summit, I found that they were very receptive to the summit. They had never really seen anything like this in Macon in a long time, at least not something of this magnitude. And they were very excited when I would make the phone calls to them. We would do the invitations over phone calls, and then we would send a follow-up email kind of with all the basic information that we talked about and thanking them for their response to the survey. We were going to do letter invites, so this would include the flyer as well as the written invitation, kind of specifically inviting them by name if we had their name, or maybe their organization. I would mainly do a lot of my networking and marketing within the different community events, as I had mentioned earlier. So a lot of the pastors' breakfast events, I was able to speak at one of them and kind of let people know about the summit, and pastors and faith-based leaders were very receptive to that. The Macon Family Connection, which is a organization that kind of hosts a lot of nonprofits for community efforts, and so those local establishments were helpful in relaying that information out into the community. The faith-based events, like this bottom right picture, I went to an event in Macon where I was also able to do a lot of networking and letting people know about the summit. And lastly, just community events. So a lot of the different health fairs that I went to, if I knew that there was a pastor in the room, then I would definitely go introduce myself and let them know about the summit. So the committee and I finalized a flyer for the most part, and we had a couple of ideas as to what we wanted to be the most eye-grabbing and the most important. So first off, we had a lot of deception as to who exactly was invited to the summit, and as I mentioned earlier, we wanted to emphasize that it was for the faith-based leaders. And so we indicated our audience as calling all faith-based leaders, and so this was very important as to the flyer and who the invitation was going to. We included our timing, so we have the event starts at 8:30, but we also mentioned that registration and a free breakfast begin at 8 a.m. So as I mentioned, the pastors were really very excited for that breakfast, and so we wanted to put that in kind of a grabbing font. We mentioned the address, and specifically for the Rescue Mission of Middle Georgia, which is where we were having our event. They have a dining hall that is kind of in the back of the facility, and so we mentioned the specific building there. And then under the topics, we mentioned the directions and the parking as to how to get to that building. We also had the RSVP link available. We had a email sign up, as well as going to navicenthealth.org where they could find it on the main page, as well as a phone number if they had any questions. And lastly, we had our host and our partnerships on the bottom of the flyer, just so they could have a better idea as to who's going to be there and who's hosting the event. And so when it came to the committee and I devising the budget, we ended up having to do a lot of grant writing. My supervisor was very skilled at grant writing, and so we were very blessed to receive a lot of different funding. But specifically for the food, we were lucky in that the venue did have on-site catering, and it was relatively cheap for our breakfast. We had a biscuit, fruit, and coffee served from 8 to 8:30, and it was relatively around $3 per person. And so we got very lucky with the food. But for the AV rental and the projection and the projector, we had to write to the Navicent Health Foundation and kind of ask for a little bit of funding. They were able to cover a little bit of that, but we were still in the works as to how we were going to cover the rest. So as I sat down with the committee and we kind of relayed different survey responses that the faith-based leaders had responded over the phone, we came up with these 5. The first being mental and behavioral health, second, chronic disease, third, youth and elderly care, fourth, patient safety, and fifth, community resources. So what was really great about the planning committee is that they were able to connect me with the proper people that could talk on these types of themes. And so they were able to connect me with really amazing people. We have people from the CEO of Navicent, we have kind of the head of healthy communities, pastoral care, RNs, emergency department, quality department. So because of the summit, or because of the planning committee, we were able to have a lot of those people cover those themes almost perfectly. And a lot of times we had people that were specialized in those themes, which is exactly what the faith-based leaders were asking for. And we also were able to include community partners that they had known, or local establishment, as to what the faith-based leaders were asking. So after we got all the speakers in place, we finally devised an agenda. And so the agenda starts with the 8 a.m. to 8:30 breakfast, and this breakfast is meant for kind of a greeting and registration, kind of getting to know people at their table, as well as going around and seeing the vendors. So this was a very important time, and that's why we indicated on the flyer that the event technically starts at 8, because we thought that networking piece was very important. Then at 8:30 you have the executive welcome, which we have a lot of the head of the departments to present kind of like, this is what Healthy Communities is, this is what Navicent is, this is what we would like to offer you, and let's be friends, that sort of thing. We also have the pastoral care there to present himself and kind of give the faith face of Navicent. We have a little break in between that with giveaways. We had some major giveaways that are related to health, like gym membership and major big ticket items. And then our first session would be about patient empowerment. So this is kind of how you can, as a patient, be kind of more familiar with your health and be okay with doctors asking specific questions, or even the patient being able to answer or ask specific questions about their health. We have another session for giveaways and a break. And then our second session is about connecting the faith-based leaders to those community resources. So we have a variety of different topics in this session. We have topics related to youth, such as vaping or child abuse, and then we also have mental health. And then before the closing, we have the Rescue Mission of Middle Georgia to kind of present their mission, and this was in our contract as to how we could get the venue to be free, was the Rescue Mission of Middle Georgia, to talk a little bit about their mission. And we thought it would be important to give each speaker 15 minutes, which we thought would be an ample amount of time for a kind of introductory sense as to what the type of work that they do and what they're all about. And then 5 minutes after they are done to kind of open up the floor for the faith-based leaders to ask their questions that they may have, or maybe have some sort of discussion or comments. So we definitely wanted the faith-based leaders to have their feedback as to what they learned and the types of questions that they may have. And this may help us understand a better view or a better idea as to the different health topics that they are dealing with in their community. So also in the goodie bags that we gave them at the sign-in, we were going to have a post-summit survey, and this type of questions are kind of, how did you hear about the summit? What did you most like about the summit? Did you like the health topics? Did you like the food? Did you like how everything was planned out? And then would you come again next year? So this would be discussed at the committee meeting after the summit was over. and we would then kind of understand what we did right that year and maybe what we could fix for next year. So some closing remarks of mine, some changes that I would have done, probably some things differently. I would have liked to have taken advantage of the committee a little bit more. They were very skilled when it came to event planning, and they had done like large scale events like this in the past. So I would have liked to kind of taken some more of their advice and maybe ask some more questions. That would have been helpful when it came to planning. When it came to grant writing, I had a little bit of background on grant writing, but my supervisor was very helpful in that and kind of helped me fill in a lot of those gaps. And I would have loved to have make those connections. So when I am out in the community, even if I am going to a health fair or a different community event that's not really related to the Faith-Based Health Summit, I would have loved to still have talked to those pastors and maybe even met some more of their faces and got to know them a little bit better. Some advantages, I think when it came to funding, we were very lucky because my supervisor was so skilled at grant writing and she also had a lot of connections. And again, with our venue being that there was on-site catering and it was relatively cheap, I think funding would have been okay. The speakers were actually spot on to a lot of the health topics that the faith-based leaders were wanting to hear. And so I was very thankful that we were able to connect with the right people because of the committee and find the speakers that were able to answer the faith-based leaders' questions. The relationships with pastors that I was able to have were very neat and unique. As I would go to a lot of these community events, they would also be there because they are so involved in the community, and we would be able to catch up, and they would ask me how the summit planning is going, and that was a very, really unique relationship that we were able to share. And lastly, I think with all the work that we were able to do, we established a really firm framework as to this event being a future event, as well as just having this event be more than a one-time year event, but more of a constantly staying connected with the faith-based organizations. So again, I want to go over some of my goals from this presentation. The audience should be able to understand the importance and the need of a faith-based health summit for Middle Georgia. The audience should be able to understand the methods used to carry out the summit. And lastly, the audience should be able to understand the components and the makeup of the summit. So this concludes my presentation. Thank you guys so much.